But first, even Canada has just shown it is less woke than Australia and more honest about race. In Australia, it seems truth just doesn't matter. For instance, I've made clear for years that Professor Bruce Pascoe, the Dark Emu author, is a fake Aborigine, no Aboriginal ancestors at all in his genealogy. In fact, his story about who his Aboriginal ancestors might have been has changed over the years. First they were on his mother's side, then they were on his father's, and he refuses to show any proof. Now, professional genealogists of the darkemuexposed.org website say his ancestry is actually 100% British. Even many of his own family deny there are Aboriginal ancestors.
Bruce, you wrote Dark Emu, a bestseller about Aboriginal society at the time of first contact. How do you identify?
I identify as Yuin and Bonorong and Tasmanian.
Do other members of your family agree you all have Aboriginal heritage?
Some do, many don't.
Yet Pascoe still won't admit he's not Aboriginal. Most extraordinary is that the ABC won't admit it either. The national broadcaster still promotes Pascoe and his works in videos to schools and claims he's Aboriginal. The 9 newspapers also don't admit he isn't, and the biggest journal in publishing just yesterday insisted Pascoe is Aboriginal. Even Melbourne University, which hired Pascoe as an Aboriginal professor, won't publicly admit he's not Aboriginal either, although it has now very quietly edited its website to delete references to Pascoe's supposed Aboriginality. What's going on there? But look, overall, it's as if the truth simply can't be admitted when it comes to race fakes like Pascoe. And look, there's more than a dozen other potential examples I've told you about on the show, like Professor Kerry Doyle, who claimed to be of a tribe that's actually unrecorded in history, the Wininini. No Aboriginal ancestors in her genealogical record, say genealogists from the darkemuexposed.org website, and no explanation from her to them or me when we've asked her why not. Or then there's South Australia's Deputy Premier, who still claims to be Aboriginal and won't tell me or the ABC why records suggest he has no Aboriginal ancestors either. And that's how it goes. There's no admissions, no matter what proof you throw out, and no resignations. Now, certainly Pascoe hasn't ever returned his New South Wales Premier's Prize for Best Book by an Aboriginal writer. Sorry, I'm not really Aboriginal. Nor has any Premier actually demanded he do so. Canada. What a contrast. Now, in Canada, a string of fake Indians have been exposed and denounced, including a prize-winning author, Joseph Boyden, and singer Buffy Sainte-Marie, going all the way back, actually, to the original fake Indian, Grey Owl. A conservationist eventually exposed as an Englishman, but only exposed after his death. And now there's another. Thomas King is the author of The Inconvenient Indian, and many other bestsellers with Indian themes, all the while claiming to be a Cherokee Indian himself. He taught Indigenous studies at university and won prizes meant for Aboriginal authors.
Look out, Bob shouts. There are Indians flying into the skyscrapers and falling on the sidewalk. Got a mohawk over here.
Oh, the elite loved him. King was made a Companion of the Order of Canada, given a National Aboriginal Achievement Award, but now has been confronted with his genealogical records and admitted that at age 82, he's not a Cherokee after all. He blames his mum for telling him his dad was, and he's returned his Aboriginal award. So, why do fake Aborigines in Canada even lose their jobs when they're exposed? Like Randy Boissonneau, a left-wing politician who had to resign as minister when he was exposed as a fake as well. So why do Canada's fake Indians lose their jobs, lose their prizes, but those apparently fake Aborigines in Australia keep them? And not just keep them, they're even protected from criticism. How can truth in Australia matter so little? And joining me is author and journalist Tony Thomas, who has covered Bruce Pascoe's career in detail and has now written about Canada's Bruce Pascoe as well, this Thomas King I mentioned, in Quadrant Online. Tony, great to see you. Can you explain to me why Canada's Bruce Pascoe has to hand back an award? He has a theatre cancelling one of his works after this revelation, but Australia's Bruce Pascoe, he gets defended.
Well, the thing was that the Cherokee Nation in North Carolina did a big genealogy of Thomas King and had a Zoom meeting and confronted him with it. And he just collapsed. He apparently was completely surprised that any genealogy had been done and that it showed that he was conclusively that he didn't have any ancestors. So at that point, he collapsed, he grovelled, he wrote a long piece in the Globe and Mail in Canada saying how sorry he was and how it had all been a mistake, but his whole life had been a lie and so on. Well, it's quite different with Pascoe because Pascoe continues to hang on to his Aboriginal identity, even though he's been unable to find that Aboriginal ancestor. But what he says is that maybe that ancestor got concealed, or maybe it was lost in child removals or something like that. And so instead, he relies on advice from his old relatives. Oh, yes, old granddad, he was definitely had a bit of Aboriginal in him, because even Pascoe says it's very remote. Well, some Aborigines accept that he's Aboriginal and others don't. And the elders, he's really gone Aboriginal because he's allowed himself to be initiated by the local UN tribe in a 3-day ceremony, he says, and maybe that helps him to become Aboriginal. And he performs all these rituals like dances to communicate with whales from the beach, and he talks to trees and animals and the sun and the moon and so on. So he firmly believes that he's Aboriginal. But he hasn't just theorised about being Aboriginal and the old rituals like Thomas King in Canada did. He's actually set up this farm, a demonstration farm at Gypsy Point, to grow native seeds, turn them into flour, and make the sort of bread that he says Aboriginals were pioneering about 50,000 years ago. And he's financed this farm through his charity called Black Duck Foods, which in 5 years has raised $2.6 million and spent it on running the farm. And of that, half's from the government, one way or another, and the other half is from private donations. Well, as you said, the Australian education system, the arts, the ABC, they've all out-promoted Bruce Pascoe as Yuin, Boonwurrung and Tasmanian. Now, if like in Canada, Bruce is suddenly convinced by some new evidence that he's not Aboriginal and agrees with that, it would just be a cultural earthquake in Australia.
Yeah, but I don't get why it's a fatal admission in Canada, but when you're confronted here, I mean, Pascoe has also said he's a Bunurong. There's a Bunurong organisation that says no, you're not. He said he's a Tasmanian Aboriginal. You got Michael Mansell and the Tasmanian Aboriginal Legal Centre saying no, you're not. It doesn't matter, and I can understand why he might think it's in his interest. I mean, there was a Canberra Times reviewer decades ago that said, oh, this particular novel of his would have been better had it been written by an Aborigine, and hey, presto, within a few years he is an Aboriginal. But why these organisations are so invested in saying he is as well when the evidence is out there?
Well, it just seems to be part of the left-wing culture. There's the religious impulse about repent because we whites have sinned. There's the green illusions about noble savages and community romantic life and harmony. And plus the Aboriginals who go in for it, whether by design or accident, wind up with a whole lot of privileges that basically aren't earned but are very welcome, obviously. So you'd have to be a psychiatrist to work out why this has gone so deep into our culture.
Well, I don't get it either. I mean, there's so many I could talk about with you tonight. Where it's shown the genealogical records showing that they're not Aboriginal. 2 Labor politicians I've mentioned on this show, 2 prominent novelists as well, including Colin Johnson. The famous Aboriginal activist Bobby Sykes turned out to be part African. The Aboriginal activist who sued me in the federal court successfully turned out to be not Aboriginal either. One distant African ancestor and said, it's incredible, but it's a miracle that there's just no repercussions. Plus a whole lot of academics. Tony Thomas, thank you so much for your time. I don't get it either. Maybe your virtue now is expressed by what kind of falsehood you're prepared to accept. You must be really committed. Anyway,